He appeared behind me on a bus and said, "I know your address." Therapists, have you ever been genuinely scared of a patient? Obligatory, not a therapist but an EMT. I have one PT that calls us saying he overdosed on meds probably once every 1 to 2 months, wears stuff with our logo and pretends to be on our ambulance service. This person used to show up to actual scenes and pretend to be one of our first responders. It took a deputy putting him in cuffs before he stopped. He also has a radio and a pager. Radio only receives, and will record our conversations and send them to me. Strangely enough, he is actually a very nice person, and if you talk to him without mentioning the ambulance you would never know he has issues. Doesn't scare me but scares some of our more experienced crew members, so I'm guessing they know something I don't. This was early on in training, but a mandated client had dropped acid before the session and it started coming on while we were talking. He didn't want to be there and was much larger than me, 5 feet 0 inches. Once he got to threatening me for being the reason everything was wrong with the world. I ended up needing to get up and leave my own office to get a supervisor. I definitely thought he would hit or strangle me if I stayed. The only one I have felt a little scared of was one who threatened to kill me. I knew she meant it. She had already violated a number of other staff. She got sent to a higher security ward and I heard she had broke staff's fingers first day she was there. She held staff and other patients hostage in one of our rooms, threatening them but circling the table as if playing with them first. I see violence and aggression regularly and it doesn't faze me, but she did. I would purposely avoid eye contact and look straight ahead, avoiding her, and pretend I wasn't intimidated, as that's what she wanted. I'm a therapist. The first in the thread. The only time I've ever been scared is when my physical safety is threatened, such as a patient blocking the door, hinting they know where I live, or implying they'd like to hurt me. I have a stellar poker face, and once these really tough patients realize that I'm unfazed, they usually drop it. My strength in therapy is mostly just broad acceptance and tolerance of whatever they bring to the table. I let them know when I have to break confidentiality from the get-go, and that's that. When I was in med school, our psychiatry attending told that years ago she dyed her hair red. Few weeks later she had a patient who obsessed with redhead women. The patient was thinking about killing redhead women and then putting their plucked head into boxes. So she had 2 weeks off and the patient was carried by another doc. I was pretty nervous when the drunk partner of a client backed me into a corner. And pretty goddamn sweaty when a violent offender with a good 80 pounds on me blocked my exit and told me he was going to kill me and my family. The one that really got me long-term was a 15-year-old girl in a residential program I worked at. She had substance use issues, which is why she was there, but it was clear from the jump that she had deep mental health stuff stemming from her child. She had been adopted out of a Russian orphanage where she and a younger sibling has been left in a crib alone for God knows how long, covered in lice and shaved bald. She had a lot of expected attachment issues, but talking to her was like talking to a black pit full of hatred. She hated everyone and everything and had no conception of consequences or what self-preservation was. She'd do stuff that would spin your head around in terms of how unsafe it was. And she just had no reaction. There was no getting through to her, as she needed the interventions when she was a very small child to be able to move forward successfully. She was discharged when it was found out that she was hiding knives under her mattress. I would not be surprised if she was in jail at this point. Worked with a patient that complained of reoccurring night terrors about lobsters being boiled alive. He couldn't figure out what was causing them. The fact he killed his girlfriend, chopped her up and boiled her head didn't seem come to him as a reason he might be having these dreams. My only fear is the system will have to release him one day, as they could never get him sane enough to stand trial. Yes. Enough to quit my job. Had high caseload of self-destructive teens. Most were medicated and low risk, but had 2 kiddos who had several suicide attempts prior to me, and while under my watch. I was getting physically ill, not sleeping well, constantly worried. I tried to transfer them to a higher level of care, but our company was greedy and didn't want to transfer them and lose those funds. I ended up quitting on the spot for these kids to be given a trauma-focused therapist and get the help they needed. Best decision for both myself and those kids. Not a therapist but a school counselor, small young female. I have a student who is 6.4 with emotional behavioral issues. Reading his social history made me cry because of all the things he's been through. So, of course, I have a soft spot for him. But his anger gets out of control and it can be very scary. He punched a pole right in front of me once and narrowly missed my face. I looked him in the eyes and sternly said, "Do you realize you almost just punched me in the face?" He snapped out of his rage and apologized profusely. I wanted to hug him and tell him everything was going to be alright. My uncle is one, and the answer is yes. Therapists aren't like they show in movies where they only deal with insanely complex and tough issues. Most of the people that come see him just have normal problems that most people can relate to. People seek therapy for a whole assortment of issues. So if someone goes to him with violent thoughts, or deeply disturbing issues and ideologies, it shocks him like it would shock the rest of us. They are just trained to handle it better than the rest of us, but deep down their reaction to it is the same. Used to be a therapist at a behavioral health hospital. I had some patients who genuinely scared me in theory, but nothing ever happened with them. I was significantly attacked twice at work. Both patients were young women. Neither of them scared me beforehand. Both were incredibly quiet, withdrawn, and unassuming. One strangled me with my keys. My lanyard was a breakaway for that very reason, but she had tried to steal them several times that shift in attempt to escape the building and run into traffic, so I stupidly knotted off the breakaway portion. We carried panic buttons on the lanyards and I was able to press it while being strangled with it. The other attack occurred when I was fairly new and on a low security unit, in view of other staff. I was walking away from the patient and she grabbed me by my hair, pulled me to the ground, and dragged me for several feet down the hallway where she began kicking me in the chest and stomach. She was sent to a higher security unit as a result. I guess I was afraid of her after that, but she wasn't there long. There was law enforcement intervention after she assaulted a pregnant nurse, pulled her to the ground as well, and stomped on her stomach. In my first semester as a practicum therapist, I had a gentleman client bring a large hunting knife to session one day. He had it in his waistband in the back. He revealed it halfway through our session. He had been referred to our practice for anger issues. Another client, this enormous dude, confessed to punching a sleeping infant in the face and head repeatedly because he had become jealous of it. Then one day he comes into session. He seems more calm than usual, and as we discuss the previous week's session he tells me about how much he hates his wife, and he had incidentally bought a gun to go deer hunting. We are in SoCal. That was the last session we had before he stopped coming. I still think about that guy a lot. I hope that baby's okay. When in doubt, report. Worked residential for 20 years. Had only 2 kids scare me. One put his baby sister in the freezer. She was found quickly and was okay. He was charming, a good-looking kid and quite clever. Also no history of trauma or abuse. Serious serial killer vibes. One was horribly abused and somehow figured out I was pregnant. I wasn't showing it all since I was fat. He would just stare at my stomach. I asked to be moved to a different group. First kid was or still may be a case study for students at the local big university. I work on an inpatient unit and there are always people around. We have had violent patients before and I have been stressed by incidents. It's easy to feel safe when you trust your co-workers. I have genuinely felt scared for my patients, however. That despite our beat efforts they will end themselves. Usually it's addicts. Addiction kills 100% of the time if the user keeps using. Whether by overdose or complications related to long-time use. There are also depressed patients who you know are probably still lethal, but adamantly deny it. There is only so long we can keep someone and you cannot effectively treat someone who refuses to be treated. They will yes you to death and leave your office and do it anyways. Bipolar patients can be the toughest on this, because they often love their manic highs and can't stand being at what the rest of the world would call a normal level. Who wants to feel normal when you can feel amazing? Never mind everything else that comes with mania. Psychotic patients aren't very scary. People get scared at the idea, but you just have to remember that it's their truth in the moment. Violence and psychosis is very rare. Most of the violent psychotics I have seen have been inwardly violent. As in, willing to hurt themselves even if they feel threatened by an outward force. Addicts are usually the only patients you have to worry about flipping out. It's almost always because they are withdrawing and want to leave to get high. It's less common but does happen that they will flip out to get medicated on the unit. Or to be threatening or menacing. Like I said earlier, doesn't actually scare me. There have been patients who disturb me, but that's another question. Yes, a couple of times. But there was only one time I think I was in real danger. Before I was a therapist, I worked for a brief time at a residential facility for youth with severe neurodevelopment disabilities, e.g., autism, intellectual disability, and behavioral problems. All of our youth had a history of violence, most had experienced trauma, and 2/3 were in state custody. Also, this was a for-profit institution that was horribly managed and woefully understaffed. I was on the older boys' wing trying to get my group ready to transition to the next activity. Now, one of the boys in my group, let's call him Jay, was pretty high functioning but had significant attachment issues. When new staff, like myself, would come in, he would quickly develop a favorite. Unsurprisingly, it tended to be one of the few who would actually treat the residents as fellow humans worthy of respect. Jay was funny, likable and would generally do what you asked, with only a little bit of sass, which honestly just added to his charming rapscallion persona. However, he'd gradually start to push boundaries, insisting that he be in that staff's group. Groups changed each shift for this exact reason, constantly demanding attention, acting out to try to get a reaction. One time he told me I would never get a boyfriend because I had a mustache, etc. If he didn't get his way, he'd get incredibly angry and upset. And then the next time you saw him, he'd be sweet as pie. Oh, and he'd also stabbed a previous favorite staff member in the face with a pencil. So anyway, I'm trying to get my group ready to go, and Jay has been continuously saying my name for like 5 minutes. In order to reinforce boundaries and not reinforce his tantruming, I told him that I would be happy to talk when we were all ready to go and then started ignoring him. I go into the room of a resident with more significant needs, e.g., largely nonverbal, intellectually disabled, to get his shoes on, and I close the bedroom door so Jay's yelling would be less upsetting to the resident. All of a sudden, Jay launches himself at the door. He's spitting mad and he's trying to get into the room with me. I don't know what he had planned, but I knew it wasn't a calm heart-to-heart conversation. So I put my whole weight on the door, fighting to keep it closed. Unfortunately, at 15, Jay is much bigger than larger than I am, which isn't saying much as I'm 5 feet 0 inches, and none of the doors have locks on them. It is not going my way. He's able to get the door open a crack, and I can see he's smiling, like this has turned into a game to him. But he's not less threatening or any more in control of his rage. I am freaking out and yelling for backup, but I can't reach my walkie without letting go of the door. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Jay gets full body tackled and hits the ground with a thud. I take advantage of the opportunity to slam the door closed and send out a frantic emergency call on the walkie. When I finally walk shaking out of the room, I see Jay, still spitting mad, is being physically restrained by staff members and sporting a brand new bloody lip. To my surprise, staff members are restraining another resident, Tom, who is sitting there calmly just waiting to be released. Apparently, Tom had a history of witnessing domestic violence, and seeing someone try to hurt women was a huge trigger for him. So he had sprinted from his room, tackled Jay, and put him in a hold. Tom's parents thought that karate would help their oppositional, angry son more than therapy. So he knew what he was doing. Tom had to face the standard consequences for violence, e.g., physical restraint until no longer a threat, loss of privileges for that day, but I made sure to thank him. I really don't know what would have happened if Tom hadn't intervened. Still scared of him. He was very delusional and a heavy addict. He decided our therapeutic engagement was a love story unfolding. Ended with the SWAT team showing up at the office when he showed up with a weapon and lost it when I wasn't there. He disappeared for a couple years. He appeared behind me on a bus one day and said, "I saw you with your daughter at your house, she's really pretty." Then gave me my address. He was a known offender. I moved as soon as I could. Not a therapist, but I used to be friends with someone with borderline personality disorder and Munchausen's. She couldn't keep a therapist. It wasn't until late in our friendship that I realized just how mentally ill she was. She lied all of the time. Her efforts, even with her therapists, were with the sole purpose of being seen as a hero. When therapists would tell her that they weren't able to help her and she needed someone who specialized in BPD, which she didn't think she had, she'd be furious. I genuinely worried about her therapist and anyone around her. There was a time I even let the therapist know what she was saying to see if she wanted me to report it to the police. The woman was very, very scary. Person on the other side. Went to my university psych hospital due to self-ending ideation. Was 18 at the time. I was lobbed in with the under 22 group, and there's this fireman in his 20s who I'd learned through the grapevine, other nosy ass patients, was bipolar. No biggie, we all got something wrong in there, right? He was very quiet, decently attractive and kept to himself even in group sessions. He would always give me this penetrative, unblinking stare all day long. I'm very shy and hadn't spoken 2 words to the guy. Maybe smiled in passing if I made eye contact, which I avoided due to the staring. In the main room, like a living room I guess for a psych ward, we'd all be hanging out and he'd sit across from me with a sketchbook. Honestly just thought he was passing time. Once you're committed you can't leave unless the doctor says so. Anyways, my mom comes to the hospital to visit me and she noticed the guy staring at me. She walks behind him while he's with his sketchbook and her entire body froze. Like completely locked up as if you're watching a video and press pause. He had drawn a very detailed picture of me, hanging from the ceiling in the psych ward. She calmly tells the nurse and the guy is removed from the room. Never saw him again. A couple of days later I overheard some nurses saying that the guy had filled the entire sketchbook with different drawings of me. Dead. In different scenarios. Honestly, it was the scariest thing I've ever been through.
Thank you for watching Susi Confession and AskReddit video. Hit the subscribe button and press the bell icon.